Reddit, what's the most chaotic good thing you've ever witnessed? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe, and I'd really appreciate it if you leave a like and comment something related to the topic. Let's begin. Story 1. A kid I went to high school with was a 2-time state champion wrestler. He was terrifying, built like a brick shithouse by the time he was 14, and by 18, he was a solid wall of muscle. He was also a vicious prick, highly aggressive, and a big-time bully to other bullies. This kid would beat the ever-loving shit out of anyone who messed with someone who couldn't defend themselves. If he saw a bigger kid picking on a smaller one, they were done for. The dude was basically the Superman of my school. If anyone was giving you trouble, you went to him. He'd take care of it after school. Story 2. I have to pat myself on the back for this one. A friend of mine had a buddy who lived in England and was having problems with his computer. This was back in the late 90s, when most people knew less than nothing about computers, as opposed to now, when most people know exactly nothing about them. The issue he described was 100% the classic case of outdated video drivers, random blue screens in certain games, bad frame rates, stuttering, stuff just refusing to work. Over 8 a.m., I told the guy to update his video drivers. He refused. Swore up and down that wasn't the problem because the card was brand new and he'd installed the drivers it came with. But it absolutely was the problem. Alright, buddy. You want to ignore the most basic troubleshooting step? Fine. I'll make sure you don't make that mistake twice. I told him, okay, if it's not your graphics card drivers, then it might be your Haversham converter going bad. I explained this huge problem to him, that it could be causing voltage spikes that might fry his CPU. For anyone who doesn't know, a Haversham converter isn't real, but I told him it was a device that sits between the motherboard and CPU in regions with 220V power, stepping it down to the 110V power the CPU actually uses. I said manufacturers only make 110V CPUs to cut costs, so they need the Haversham to prevent frying the chip. I even told him it was the most important part of any computer in a 220V region. How do I check? He asked. Poor guy. I said, you need to open your Haversham utilities. If you're on Windows 98, it should be in Start menu, Utilities, Haversham, Verify. He looked. Didn't find it. No problem, I said. It's been moved around a few times. Try Control Panel Devices, Haversham. He looked again. Nothing. Then I asked what brand his computer was. Packard Bell, he said. Oh damn, I told him. Packard Bell ship with the utilities disabled in software. The hardware is still checking it, but they're a crappy company. You'll probably have to enable it through the registry. By now, we were an hour into this troubleshooting session, 50 minutes of which had been me completely making things up because he refused to listen to me in the first place. Still, I told him, don't change anything. Just open a command prompt and type regedit. Then go to HKY_local_machine and look for Haversham. He didn't find it, of course. So I said, damn, they must have it locked away in the BIOS. We'll need to reboot. When you're in the BIOS, go to the hardware page. You'll find an option to toggle Haversham utilities on. That's all you need to do. He logged off AIM. By this point, we'd been at it nearly 2 hours. Half an hour later, he came back and said, I tried it like 5 times and couldn't find any options for Haversham utilities. Well, I told him, it could be one of 2 things. Either your motherboard doesn't have a Haversham converter and does the voltage stepping at the power supply, or, and this is more likely, I've been making this shit up the entire time, and you need to update your graphics drivers like I told you 2.5 hours ago. There was a long pause. Even over AIM, I could feel his stages of grief from across the ocean. Finally, he just said, oh, fuck you, dude. Then he logged off. About an hour later, he came back to say he'd updated the drivers and everything was working perfectly. Story 3. You guys probably won't believe this story, but here it goes. I have a relative, let's call him Jabba, who is the perfect example of neutral evil. He's always scheming, always looking for ways to screw people over, even his own family. Here's the best example I've ever seen of chaotic good absolutely crushing neutral evil. Jabba was moving from one house to another and hired a cleaning lady, paid under the table since her residency status was less than legal, to get the old place ready to sell. It was a big job that took over a month, and he kept putting off paying her. He's a master bullshitter, always stringing people along. Finally, the house was spotless and ready, but still, no payment. He kept giving her excuses until one day she showed up at his door, and I guess he decided to end his little game. He straight up told her, "I ain't gonna pay you shit. What are you gonna do, call the cops? You're illegal. You'll get your ass deported." Wahaha. She left and tried to get a couple of male family members to help scare him into paying, but he refused to answer the door and thought the whole thing was hilarious. Until one day, he was away from home all day, and according to witnesses, a pickup truck and a few men showed up at his house. They were seen leaving with his big screen TV. Apparently, they'd gotten in through a window that had always had a bad lock, something the cleaning lady would definitely have noticed. They didn't take or disturb anything else, but that TV was his prized possession and, coincidentally, worth about as much as he owed her. They could have taken plenty of other valuables, even cash, but didn't. They just took what they were owed. Jabba was furious, completely beside himself. He even cried about it. No one in the family felt the slightest bit sorry for him. Story 4. I was driving 130 kilometers per hour, the legal limit here, on a two-lane highway, just about to overtake a small van that was behind a truck. At the last second, the driver of the van swerved into the left lane, forcing me to choose between braking hard and swerving left slightly, or having a high-speed collision. I managed to regain control of my car and, out of frustration, honked once to let him know he'd nearly killed both of us. I figured he must not have seen me, because no sane person would do that otherwise. I was wrong. The guy instantly brake-checked me and refused to pass the truck, keeping both of us trapped while repeatedly slamming on his brakes. Eventually, he passed the truck and moved into the right lane, making it seem like he'd calmed down, only to swerve back into the left lane the moment I tried to pass, starting the whole thing all over again. At that point, I kind of accepted my fate and decided to stay behind the truck until the lunatic ahead finally chilled out. Then, out of nowhere, a driver in a fast Audi, who had ended up behind me thanks to Mr. Brakecheck slowing everyone down, had apparently had enough. The Audi driver overtook the truck using the emergency lane, quickly passed the van, and then unleashed the mother of all brake checks. He cut the van off so hard that the guy was forced off the right side of the road, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. As far as I could tell, he wasn't hurt, just stopped on the shoulder, probably shaken and humiliated. I took the chance to finally pass the truck and continue my drive. A minute later, still processing what I'd just seen, the vigilante in the Audi pulled up beside me in the left lane, gave me a quick nod, and then sped off into the distance. Story 5. I was attacked by a guy in high school. He backed me into a corner and twisted my arm behind my back because he wanted the bracelet I was wearing. I managed to pull free and decked him, and then it turned into an all-out brawl. He split my ear open, and I tore out handfuls of his hair and scalp. It was ugly. I had never even spoken to this asshole before he decided to demand my stupid leather cuff. We both got suspended, which was fine by me. I did the crime, and I was perfectly okay with 5 days out of school. But after we came back, things got interesting. The very day he returned, he got suspended again. Then again the next time he came back. And again after that. Everywhere I went on campus, I suddenly had a quiet pack of bodyguards, polite, unobtrusive, but always around. A bunch of brotherly redneck types had decided they weren't going to tolerate a girl hitter, and one by one, they jumped him at school until he got suspended so many times that he was eventually expelled. Turns out, I might have been the weird goth homeless girl at school, but I was their weird goth homeless girl. Apparently, young boys in the South will beat the hell out of anyone who lays a hand on a girl if they get the chance. A lot of them even took the time to tell me they appreciated me, not for how I looked, but for who I was. They called me kind, brave, smart, tough, badass. All because I fought like a wildcat when cornered. I never liked the idea of what happened. I didn't ask for it or encourage it. That boy cornered me, grabbed me, and my fight-or-flight response went into overdrive. I don't like that they beat him up every time he came back to school, or that the staff let it happen. But no one had ever treated me like someone worth protecting before that day. No brother, no father, no friend, no mother, no one. The kindness faded as life threw me more curveballs, and my situation became harder for other kids to relate to. But I never forgot that, for a little while, people cared that someone had hurt me. Story 6. The year was 2003, and I was visiting family in England. I'd walked about a mile to a game store that was running a deal, 2 PS2 games for £60. I was excited to grab a couple of games for my brother, ones I knew he'd love, but would never buy for himself. I pulled out the £100 note my cousin had given me and bought the games as quickly as I could, thrilled to run back to my cousin's place so I could message my brother and tell him what I'd gotten. I sent him a message, eagerly waiting for his reply, only for him to tell me the games wouldn't work on our US console. My heart sank. The store had a strict no returns or refunds policy. My cousin suggested I go back anyway, explain the situation, and hope for the best. So the next day, I trudged back, fully expecting to enter a no-fly zone when it came to getting a refund. I explained the situation to the guy behind the counter, and this dude was cool. Mohawk, tattoos, more piercings than I could count. He looked like he lived on an entirely different level of coolness than I could ever dream of. He gave me the standard, no returns, no exchanges, no refunds line. Then, without hesitation, he opened one of the game cases, pulled out the disc, and absolutely scratched the hell out of it. Did the same to the other one. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Oh no, looks like these were sold to you damaged. I'll refund you right away." No wink, no smile, no smirk, just pure, no-nonsense hero energy. Brother, if by some miracle you're reading this, you changed how I see the world that day. You're a real one, a true bro, and I admire and appreciate you more than words can express. Story 7. I've got 2 family legends, because my family has always been very into chaotic good. I'm not entirely sure if the first one is true, but I know the second one is, because I've seen the newspaper clippings myself. First one, my great-great-aunt supposedly had a husband who liked to get drunk and beat her, but she couldn't divorce him because, society, the church, all that. She finally broke down and told her sister what was happening. Her sister told their oldest brother, who ran the family farm where nearly everyone in the family worked. A few weeks later, the abusive husband died in a farming accident out in the fields. Occupational hazard. How tragic. My great-great-aunt's second marriage was, by all accounts, a happy one. Second one, my uncle bought a house intending to fix it up and flip it. Most of the block was nice, except for one abandoned house that had fallen into total disrepair. It was an eyesore, and even worse, neighborhood kids kept sneaking inside even though it wasn't safe. It was dragging down the property values, but the guy who owned it refused to fix it or sell it. The city was broke and didn't want to deal with it. Nobody knew what to do. My uncle complained about it to a friend, forgetting that this particular friend had some sketchy mob connections. A few weeks later, a kind gentleman visited the local fire chief and politely suggested that, should he receive a call about that specific house, it would be wise to focus on keeping the fire from spreading to nearby homes. Meanwhile, another kind gentleman paid a visit to the police chief, warning him that children had been seen playing in that abandoned house. Wouldn't it be dangerous? Shouldn't he warn parents not to let their kids wander around that area on a certain day? Maybe even have an officer parked out front all day and evening until around 11 p.m., just to be safe? That night, at around 11:30, the abandoned house mysteriously caught fire and burned to the ground. No one was hurt. The fire didn't spread, and afterward, the neighborhood's property values quietly went up. Story 8. There was a cliff over the water that we used to jump off back in high school. It was a well-known swimming hole, though sometimes some sketchy meth heads would hang out there. One day, about 30 of us were there, and this one guy, probably around 65, but looking like a worse version of Tom Hanks in Castaway, was sitting at the top of the bluff. Long, tangled hair and beard, leathery skin, skinny as hell. He had his own case of beer and smelled like stale cigarettes, mold, and meth. We left him alone, and he left us alone. He just sat there watching and drinking. A group of us jumped, and as we were walking back up the trail to the top, someone suddenly yelled. There was a massive copperhead, like 4 feet long, right across the path. Before any of us could react, the old dude practically leapt down the rocks in 3 giant jumps. Without hesitation, without even sizing up the situation, he lunged at the snake, grabbed it right behind the head, lifted it high above his head, and let out the most primal scream I've ever heard. I can still see him perfectly in my mind, standing there in his stained jorts, matted hair flying, the snake curling its tail around his arm as he roared like some kind of feral swamp god. It was absolutely incredible. Story 9. I was flying back home after visiting a friend in Florida for her birthday and had a layover in Atlanta. Unfortunately, my first flight out of Florida was delayed due to weather, and by the time I landed in Atlanta, 3 hours late, my second flight had already been rebooked for the next morning. That meant I had to spend the night in Atlanta. It was nearly midnight, and the airline employees were zero help. Nobody knew how to issue a hotel voucher, and they all told me I wasn't getting any kind of accommodation. I get that weather delays happen, but don't make it your policy to offer vouchers for situations like that, and then completely blow people off when it happens. Fast forward to me spending the night in the Atlanta airport, lying on the floor outside security, getting my foot run over by the janitor's floor cleaning cart, and not sleeping a single minute. By morning, I was exhausted and just shuffling toward the gate for my new flight. I ended up chatting with a guy who'd been on the same delayed flight and had also spent the night there. When I casually mentioned that I hadn't been vouched for and had been turned away multiple times, he suddenly got fired up. "That's not right. They can't do that to you," he said. Then he just bolted out of line and disappeared for about half an hour. When he came back, he was on his phone, clearly pissed off, making a bunch of calls. Turns out he'd gone through the airport tracking down the employees who had refused to follow policy and reported my situation to some of his friends, who, apparently, were executives for the airline. Long story short, he got one of those employees suspended, and I ended up receiving a $100 voucher toward future flights, along with a very apologetic email from the airline. I never even got his name, but thank you, chaotic good airport man. You absolutely saved me that day. Story 10. I started a new job a few years back. They told me it was customer tech support. Turns out, it was actually a scam business, stealing money from elderly people under the guise of fixing their computers. Of course, they didn't say that to us outright. They wanted the employees to believe it was legitimate and just hoped no one would ask too many questions. The first day was all classroom-style training, and so was the first half of day 2. After lunch that second day, they told us we'd start taking calls. My very first call came through, and I immediately realized what was happening. So, loud enough for everyone around me to hear, I told the caller that this was a scam, that the pop-up on their computer saying it needed repairs, and to call XXXXXXX was actually planted by the company so they could charge $300 for remote access and steal whatever they wanted. I'm pretty sure at least 3 other callers on nearby lines heard me in the background blowing the whole thing up. I finished the call, stood up, and walked right out the door to find a new job. I'd still occasionally see people from my training group outside that building afterward. Within a year, the place was shut down and the office space was empty. I did some digging later and found out they hadn't paid their employees in over 2 months by the time they closed. Best non-career move of my life, honestly. Story 11. This might sound silly, but bear with me. When I was in high school in the 90s, there was this little poster on a bulletin board in the lunchroom. It said, "You are not alone," in big white letters, and had a helpline number underneath, or something like that. I don't remember exactly. Someone, however, had taken a black marker and filled in the word "not," leaving the message as "You are alone" for everyone to see. I hated that poster. What was supposed to be a message of hope had been twisted into something cruel and ugly. Day after day, I saw it hanging there, with teachers and staff walking right by, doing nothing. One day, I had an epiphany, an idea so simple I couldn't believe it had taken me that long to think of it. I had a whiteout pen. I used it to doodle on my binders and stuff all the time. I could fix the damn poster. So I did. A friend came with me, just in case a teacher tried to stop us. Sure enough, one walked up and asked what we were doing. One of us, I don't remember who, said firmly, "We're fixing this poster." The teacher looked kind of amused, but let us go on. I carefully used the whiteout pen to fill in the blacked out "not," tracing over the outlines of the original letters. It wasn't perfect. The lines were jagged and thick, but it got the message across. For a while, the poster stayed up like that. You could tell someone had vandalized it, and then someone else had cared enough to make it right again. Eventually, the poster disappeared. My fixed version didn't last as long as the defaced one, but it was there for a while. I like to think people saw it and understood what it meant. I know it sounds small, but I was a good kid. I never broke rules, never got in trouble, always played it safe. That tiny act of rebellion, fixing that poster, was one of the most meaningful things I ever did, and I'm still proud of it. Story 12. My dad has told me some hilarious stories from his construction days in the Caribbean. For context, he worked under the construction manager at the time. They had a big problem with workers stealing supplies, shovels, hammers, pickaxes, that kind of thing. They tried asking nicely, enforcing rules, probably even threatening to fire people, but nothing worked. They were losing tons of money replacing tools and getting desperate. Eventually, they heard about a local guy with a reputation for being an effective bodyguard and security enforcer. His name was Cyril Cherry, not sure about the spelling. So they explained the situation to him, and Cyril just said he'd be there at 5 p.m. when everyone was leaving, and he'd take care of it. They paid him up front. By 4:59, there was still no sign of him, and they figured they'd been scammed. The trucks started loading up, getting ready to drive the workers back into town. Then, right at 5 o'clock, the truck stopped. A dust cloud was rolling toward them down the one-lane dirt road. At 5:02, Cyril's truck came barreling in, looping around all the work trucks and kicking up a storm of dust and gravel. He stopped right in front of the exit, blocking it, got out of his truck, and fired 2 shotgun blasts into the air. Everyone froze. Then, loud enough for the whole site to hear, he said, "These guys is missing a whole bunch of tools. They want them back. Best they not be missing tomorrow." The next morning, when my dad showed up to work, there was a 6-foot-tall pile of tools waiting for them. Every last missing shovel, hammer, and pickaxe had been returned. Apparently, they continued to hire Cyril's services every now and then for the next several years, and never lost another tool again. Story 13. My mom. She's the most stereotypical conservative Catholic woman you can imagine, and she looks the part, but if she sees something she doesn't like, she goes off. The thing is, she also really stands up for people, which is kind of amazing. When I was a kid, there was this group of rebellious, chain-smoking teenagers who used to hang out on the corner near our house. The neighbors hated it, but my mom defended them, saying that teenagers needed a safe place to hang out, and at least there, people could see them and make sure they weren't getting into real trouble. One day, we were at Burger King, and 2 of those same kids were sitting a few tables away. Suddenly, one of them pulled out a gun to show his buddy. My mom didn't even hesitate. She stormed over, yelling at him to put it away right now and to hand over any bullets he had. The whole place went silent. This 6 feet 6 inches kid sheepishly gave the 90s version of Donna Reed his ammo while she kept going. "I have kids here with me. This is a family restaurant. Where do you think you are? I'll return these to you later." I was absolutely terrified, convinced we were going to get shot right there, but weirdly, that moment changed everything. After that, those same guys were so nice to her. They'd help carry her groceries, hold doors open for her, and offer me candy or gum whenever I walked by. She even had another moment like that later, yelling at 2 of them in a pizzeria for using bad language. Somehow, she could scold a gang member like a nun with a ruler and still make them adore her. Story 14. So, I used to live in an old farmhouse about an hour or so outside of DC. One year, we threw a big St. Patrick's Day party, and as people do, we were drinking heavily. One of my really good friends came, and he had kind of a bring whoever you want pass at my place because he usually had great judgment about people. Usually, this was the one time he didn't. So, the party's in full swing, everyone's having a great time, and this new guy, let's call him Pee Pants, starts looking for something to drink after saying earlier that he wasn't going to. Well, Pee Pants finds a mason jar full of moonshine and decides to drink the whole thing. Anyone who's ever had moonshine knows that's a very bad idea. Within an hour, his night goes completely off the rails. He starts making creepy advances toward people, acting like a total jerk, and just being a general disaster. Everyone keeps telling him to chill out, but eventually, he sits down, passes out, and pisses himself. At this point, I'm furious. I thought my friend would have known better, or at least handled the situation before it got to this point. My friend was mad too, but instead of doing something reasonable, like walking the guy to a nearby house, calling him a cab, or just dumping him outside to sleep it off, he decides to haul Mr. Pee Pants all the way to Washington, D.C., and leave him near the 14th Street Bridge at like 2 or 3 in the morning. Good times. Story 15. There was this guy who worked with us at Wendy's who made everything harder for everyone around him. He constantly missed shifts, always had some excuse, and openly bragged that he couldn't be fired because of his disability. He was toxic to work with, nobody liked him, and he didn't have a single friend on the crew. One night, he stopped by to check the schedule that was posted on the office door. He decided he needed a new work shirt, but the office was locked and the manager wasn't around. So he started trying to jimmy the lock open like an idiot, failing miserably. That's when my buddy strolled over, swiped his key card, and opened the door for him with the biggest, friendliest smile. The guy went in, grabbed a shirt from the cabinet, and left, without bothering to close any of the doors behind him. A little while later, the manager came back, saw the office open, and asked what had happened. We just said, "Guy got into the office and left." Turns out, the cash box had been sitting open on the desk inside. Management thought he'd stolen company property, and since he already had a few prior strikes, they decided to fire him on the spot. My buddy and I laughed about it for months. Story 16. I don't know if this is the most chaotic good thing I've ever witnessed, but it definitely came to mind after reading some of these stories. I was at an event that had rented out an entire campsite. A few of us were swimming in the river when a couple of people came floating by in a canoe. It was immediately clear that they were completely wasted. They wanted to stop and get out at our camp, but since it was a private event, we had to tell them they couldn't and needed to keep going downstream. They made a bit of a scene about it, but eventually got back in their canoe and headed off. They didn't make it far before one of them spotted some drinks, Gatorade, I think, that a camper had left cooling in the river. One of the drunks jumped out of the canoe, grabbed both cases, and tried to paddle away. I saw what they'd done and shouted to alert everyone. Right next to me was this guy, standing knee-deep in the water, wearing nothing but Superman briefs and holding a beer. Without a word, he handed me the beer, turned, and took off running down the river after them. He was barefoot, splashing through waist-deep water, absolutely flying like a man possessed. The thieves were about 100 feet away, but he was determined. They saw him coming and panicked, tossing one of the cases overboard to lighten the load. My superhero managed to grab it before it drifted away. They escaped with the other one, but honestly, watching that drunk, barefoot man in Superman underwear charge down the river like a mythic river god of justice was completely worth it. Story 17. My dad. If he sees something that needs to be done, he'll just get up and do it. No hesitation, no waiting for someone else to handle it. He just takes care of it. He's one of those people who constantly does good deeds for others, even complete strangers. If he sees someone broken down on the side of the highway, he'll pull over, offer them a ride to the auto parts store, and help them replace whatever broke. Alternator, belt, you name it. He's even paid for the parts himself more than once and never accepts anything in return. He'll trim overgrown bushes or tall grass near intersections if they block visibility. He'll clear blind corners to prevent accidents. He just sees a potential danger and fixes it, no questions asked. When I was a kid, and even now that I'm grown, he'd pull off the road to grab sharp debris, bits of metal, shredded tires, anything that could cause a blowout or crash. He once repaired a neighbor's mailbox that had been knocked over, didn't even tell them, just fixed it because it bothered him to see it broken. If tree limbs were hanging over the road and looked like they might fall, he'd get permission and cut them himself. One of the more recent things he did was fill in a bunch of potholes between a busy Lowe's and Walmart. They were deep enough to destroy a tire, and the city hadn't done anything for months. So he bought asphalt and patched them up himself. My sister later helped him write a letter to the state about it, and they ended up repaving the entire section of road. Every time I drive through there, I think of him. He'll stop to rescue turtles from the road, feed abandoned dogs, and take them to shelters. My father is just a good man. The kind who'd give you his shoes, the shirt off his back, and insist you take the last bit of his money if you needed it. Sure, people have taken advantage of him. A guy once stole a bunch of his tools, but it's never stopped him. He keeps going, keeps helping, keeps choosing to make the world a little better. These are just a few things from a very long list of good deeds he's done. It's honestly incredible. I'm unbelievably proud of my dad, but I don't think I've ever told him that. Story 18. I used to be a regular at this local punk/hardcore venue that's long gone now. I was a bit older than most of the crowd, one of the few teenagers who didn't leave town for college, so I kind of became part of the furniture there. One night, I showed up for a show and took my usual spot, right on the edge of the pit. It was the perfect place to help anyone who fell, act as a buffer for people who didn't want to get caught in the chaos, and just have a solid view of everything. Two snotty teenagers decided to plant themselves behind me and spent most of the night trying to shove me into the pit, specifically toward the hardcore dancing, karate-style moshers. I guess they thought it'd be funny if I caught a stray kick or punch to the face. I was 22 at the time, and they were clearly minors. They weren't strong enough to move me, and I wasn't about to start a fight with kids, so I just ignored them. After the first band finished, everyone went out for a smoke. A few of the regulars came up to me, pissed off on my behalf, asking why I didn't just knock the little punks flat. I explained that I wasn't about to hit a minor, and that the best way to ruin their fun was to act like I didn't care. We went back in for the second band, and sure enough, the pushing continued. Whatever. I was mildly annoyed, but not enough to let them ruin my night. When that band wrapped up, more of the scene kids were mad on my behalf, but I just repeated what I'd said. I'm an adult, they're not, and I'm not stooping to their level. Then the third and final band started. I went back to my usual spot, and as soon as the first breakdown hit, I felt a rush of air, then saw a foot fly right over my shoulder and land squarely in one of those kids' faces. Dude went down instantly, out cold. I was still trying to process what I'd just witnessed when one of the 17-year-old regulars looked at me with this huge grin and said, "Hey, you didn't acknowledge them." But I did. Both of the troublemakers left right after that. The staff didn't see what happened, so they just chalked it up to another mosh pit accident. Not gonna lie, it was extremely satisfying. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.